From Uniting the Cults and History Flights Productions, it's The Hidden Faith, a truly independent investigation of the Baha'i faith. I'm here today with Dale Husband, the Honorable Skeptic and moderator of RX Baha'i, and Chris Bennett, religion and cannabis researcher. We're here today to discuss the Baha'i faith, the Fatimiya Sufi Order, as expressed mainly, though not exclusively, through the person of Wahid cult leader, and Guardianist Baha'is. Why don't we kick it off? Yes, so I have written a few in response to Wahid. Have I done a good job in the past few episodes of The Hidden if you've managed to see that? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, I think you do a pretty good job. As for me, I tend to be more of a writer than a speaker. So I can spend hours working on my blog, writing in considerable detail and providing evidence for everything that I write about for the sake of credibility. So you just have to make sure that everything you talk about, everything you write about is backed up by credible evidence.
Yeah, even though I insulted Wahid at times, I think that that was well-founded by his behavior. I think that Wahid is the better writer on high theory and Sufi religious background because he has experience with that, but he is very insular. He tends to preach to the converted, if you know what I mean. And he seems to have quite a few, at least subscribers, who are at least a little interested in what he has to say on, say, translating the writings of the Bab, which is a scholarly contribution that he's made. So he's not stupid. He's just stubborn.
I thought he was gendered. Yeah, that was just not cool. You know, he claims to be this big leftist, and right off the bat there, then he's always continually trying to pin Zionism on people. I'm definitely against Israel and what's happening in Gaza and stuff like that, but I think that there's a rabidness to his that breaches over into anti-Semitism, the way that he hurls, you were for a two-state solution that would be offensive to him, you know?
Yeah, which I am for, by the way, because that's been the only practical solution since 1947. Do I like Israel's actions? No, but I don't want innocent people to die either on either side, and hate both leaderships because I have expressed many times, after doing much careful research and much reflection and evolving in my positions as a result, that both Hamas and the Israeli government are committing genocide to varying degrees.
Netanyahu got Hamas started. There was a lot of funding that came from Netanyahu. This is a well-known fact. You can just Google.
It used to be a charity, too.
To foil talks with the Palestinian Authority about two-state solutions. I think the two-state solution is one thing, but I think Alain Pape may be onto something, too, with one secular state, you know? That might be a solution there as well.
That's basically Belgium. They have the French sector, the German sector, and then the Walloon sector. And that works well because there's a history of parliamentary democracy there. There's not so much in the Middle East, which is often has states represented by Sharia law. I have a problem with that because it decides that human rights are subservient to Islam. I don't necessarily think that democracies have to copy the exact Western structures, but as long as the people get a vote, I don't really care. And Israel, the people do vote. There are Arab Israelis who vote for parties and have a dual identity in that regard. Speaking of Islamic or post-Islamic, he names himself a grand sheikh of a Sufi order, yet he's also a Bab? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know about that either. That's pretty wild.
Let me put it this way. As I see it, the Muslims, especially in the Middle East where Islam originated, seem to be in the state of the same spiritual state that Christians of Europe were in about 1,000 years ago. And just as it took Christians of Europe from about 1500 to 1800 to move through a period of enlightenment in which they were no longer ruled with absolute power by kings and emperors who used the church to keep the lower classes in line, known as feudalism. Okay, Muslims are still stuck in their own brand of feudalism with kings, you know, ruling over most of the Middle East with a few exceptions. And so it's going to take a long time for Islam to become the Islamic peoples of the Middle East and Southeast Asia to become more secularized. But I do believe that will inevitably happen over time as more and more people become more exposed to different points of view via the internet.
A lot of Islamic people I know here in Canada is full of Islamic people. Most of them are very well educated. Wahid as well, he's very well educated. There's definitely the situation there of the politics. Iran was actually pretty liberal before the Iranian Revolution, and a lot of that happened because of the United States. If anything, I think the United States has exasperated problems in the Middle East.
Oh, absolutely.
Life a lot worse for people there.
That's why I don't want them
creating
bombing Iran
hostility.
right now for the protesters. A few points as well. One, feudalism still exists on the island of Sark. It's much more for the tourists these days, but there is still a lord who technically governs. Two, it then makes it hypocritical that Wahid is so rabidly anti-Western because he received a Western education. Not that he's obligated to have any position, but at least follow the scholarly conventions such as, I don't know, citing your sources. Three, it's interesting, Dale, that you mentioned enlightenment, because that was one of my points in my initial video attacking Wahid, The Madness of King Wahid Part 1, because I said, well, he tries to frame enlightenment values as exclusively a European thing. It may have started in Europe as a response to the 30 Years' War, which was the last major brutal war based on religion, to my knowledge, that Europe went through, and established the idea of Westphalian sovereignty to begin with. But these are universal ideals that have been picked up by revolutionaries and applied everywhere. Once people started to get the idea of freedom, and once it was successful in America and France, people kept trying. I mean, the entire reason for the Bob existing and getting a following was because that was a period in the mid-19th century in America with the Mormons and elsewhere in the Great Burning Empire and other places of people deciding to try to apply more rationality to religion. I still think it's very presentist for the time, and the Bahai faith in particular falls down on a number of scientific topics, including the acceptability of homosexuality and the naturalness of it.
One of my biggest influences in making me leave the Bahai faith after I'd been a member for about 8 years or so were the writings of George Orwell, in particular his novels 1984 and Animal Farm. In fact, George Orwell wrote Animal Farm as a specific critique of the Soviet Union under the leadership of Joseph Stalin.
Right.
Stalin had started out as a middle-level member of the Communist Party. He soon became the general secretary of the Communist Party, and after Lenin passed, he basically maneuvered himself into supreme power over the Communist Party. And then over the next, 20, 30 years, he basically did everything but be a communist afterwards. He ruled the Soviet Union, even though technically it had a socialist economy, he actually ruled like a total fascist. And he actually killed more of his own people than his contemporary dictator Adolf Hitler killed of Jews and others during the Holocaust of World War II. So in some respects, Joseph Stalin was an even worse dictator than Hitler.
In some respects, yes.
General thing is, I've noticed about Wahid is that he basically attacks anything Western, anything liberal, including so far as to bash the Unitarian Universalist Association, which I'm a member of.
So am I, so that makes me sick.
And to me, the fact that he does that, even though UUs have never said anything particularly against his beliefs. In fact, UUs are very accepting of diverse religious beliefs like Islam, Christianity, Judaism, paganism, and so forth. The reason he bashes Unitarian Universalism is because just like Joseph Stalin, he has this authoritarian mindset. He's basically a narcissist. And when you are a sociopathic narcissist, you're either the leader, having followers that follow you, or you have enemies. There's no standing equals with anyone with someone like that.
Did he reveal himself as a living mirror to you there, Dale? Or did you figure it out along the way?
What do you say?
Did he reveal himself as the living mirror to you?
Oh, that nuttiness.
Did you figure it out along the way yourself?
Not really. He didn't say anything specifically to me about that, but I later did find out through listening to one of his podcasts that he explicitly claimed to be a manifestation of God.
Yep.
In other words, putting himself on the same level as Baha'u'llah, who he considers to be like the ultimate cult leader, and he himself is a cultist too. Yeah. And it's very interesting because when I was watching the video of DC Separate and Wahid is All Together about 10 months ago, was it?
Yeah, approximately.
It was very hard for me to watch because I had a sense of deja vu.
I should have listened to you.
Because he and Wahid is All and I had done a similar project about 6 years ago. And even when I was watching DC Separate and Wahid is All Together, in the back of my mind, I thought within a year, those two are going to be enemies.
Yeah.
I was proven right.
To your point, I really tried not to be his enemy for as long as I could because he said, well, if you disavow me, I'll disavow you right back, and I didn't want that smoke. But eventually, the breaking point came when he accused me of being for the state of Israel's actions simply because I wasn't willing to write off October 7th, the murder rape and kidnapping of innocent people as the cost of revolution. As I just argued in a video essay I just did reviewing Avatar, Fire and Ash, nonviolence should be the main thing and violence should be a last resort because nonviolent revolutions have worked. To your point about authoritarianism and Animal Farm, Dale, did you see the 2026 Animal Farm trailer?
No, I don't think so. What was
Good,
it?
good. It looks terrible. It's an animated adaptation for kids, which George Orwell explicitly did not want. Trying to sausage party-ify, if you know that movie, Animal Farm, by making it more of a comedy with Seth Rogen as Napoleon. An out-of-touch elite playing an out-of-touch elite makes sense, since he said, oh, you know, the 15th time you get your car jacked into, you might get a little knife as a present. Like, I like his movies, but he can be such a stoner in, like, the worst way possible, if that makes any sense. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that, and we'll get to entheogenic stuff because the main thing I want to talk about relating to Chris Bennett is the psychedelic fatwa controversy. Do you want to kick it off, Chris?
Okay.
I've been part of the plant medicine, cannabis legalization scene for a few decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Wahid came in strong in the around 2014, 2015 with this claim of fatwa from an Ayatollah in Iran that he said he almost endorsed psychedelics, but said they were permitted, right? That's how I kind of got to know him. Now, after we ran into a conflict, I kind of went back and looked at that. I could not find any, Iranian news stories about it, anything from the Mideast about it. And I'm familiar with similar fatwas regarding cannabis because cannabis, like the psychedelics, aren't specifically referenced in the Quran prohibitions of alcohol. And I think opium is also more specifically identified even in the Quran. And so there was a lot of debates about it through the Islamic medieval period forward, whether it was permitted or forbidden. Some people argued, well, it's not explicitly forbidden in the Quran, so it's permitted. But other people argued, well, it gets you intoxicated like wine, so therefore it's forbidden. The legalization or the permission of cannabis varied from place to place and over time in various regions. In fact, I think in Iran, it wasn't explicitly prohibited until the 60s or something like that.
Wow.
So there was a lot of discussion, a lot of, like the prohibition of cannabis in the Islamic world as well as India, is, leftover stuff from European influences, Britishraj in India, right? This is directly where the cannabis prohibitions, then later with UN treaties and stuff like that as well, forced prohibition of cannabis in other places in the world too, like Nepal. And all the fatwa is saying is, well, they don't specifically mention these plants in the Quran, and Muhammad doesn't specifically mention them, so they're not prohibited. They're not explicitly prohibited. All the stuff about psychedelics and mind expansion, stuff like that, it's not clear that the Ayatollah ever really addressed any of that.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Raj because as a closing statement for my Avatar essay, I drew upon the nonviolent revolution by Gandhi, even though he was a creep to his great nieces, that helped end the British Raj in the first place, as opposed to the failed Indian rebellion of 1857, where poor Bahadur Shah II, Zafar, he was the last Mughal emperor who basically just ruled the city of Delhi because his ancestors had been puppets of the Marathas for a long time, and the British were like, okay, we'll let you keep your pretty palace if you let us collect taxes. And then he was reluctantly roped into war. He tried to have his son be the commander of the army, but he was terrible, so he just sat back and hoped for the best and was a symbolic figurehead. But Bengal dropped out of the war because they didn't want to be ruled by an Islamic dynasty again, which was what the Mughals were. But then when he was overthrown, he just had a quiet life, writing awesome poetry like, "Then the sword of Hindustan shall flash before the throne of London," which goes so hard, in my opinion. It's funny, too, that Islam is so authoritarian. I've been wondering about this for a project that I'm doing about the Byzantine Empire and its interactions with Islam called The Empire of Many Lives that will be multiple video essays over several months. I think that it probably was just the idea of loose, disparate tribes being united by one leader that led to authoritarianism in the first place, and the natural succession disputes of having religion intertwined with power.
Yeah, I think that's true of all religions, not just Islam.
No. I was specifically speaking out of the
Testament.
context there. And again, it's interesting that he tries to claim authority over the Babi faith when I could never find any mention of him on bionic.com. Well, I thought about reaching out to them, but they probably don't even respond to emails much anymore because there may be a few hundred people who are all living in silence.
Yeah, I doubt they even know who he is.
Exactly my point. He keeps trying to claim authority in places that he's not an expert in, as well as places he's an expert in.
He's going to take me to the United Nations court on
What?
behalf of
I
the
thought that
Baha'is.
United Nations thing was just about the Baha'is. That he was just like, oh, the Baha'is are discriminating against me because they kicked me out per their rules, I guess. Like,
Yeah, no, he has an article where he's bringing it up against me in Cannabis Culture magazine. He wrote 20 articles about me.
Oh, right. Yes, I did cover that in my big presentation that I made for Rami Rustam because, well, I can understand Rami's position. The controversy threatened to swallow United and the cults in general, and I think he and his experiences with Wahid on his podcast, which it would be nice if that got taken down, but I don't expect it. I don't even expect Wahid to respond to my demands to take down my real name because he weaponizes that kind of shit all the time, unless legal process stops him. But yeah, so I can understand Rami's position that he didn't want to get caught up in a bunch of infighting, but I laid out all my evidence, and he let me continue on with uniting the cults. And after this episode, I will be comparing the Baha'i faith to other cults instead, like the people helping people pyramid scheme that I've been doing research into for about a year. This is how cults work. They offer you nice food and nice people as bait. That's exactly what happened with the Baha'is too. I got lulled in by
love bombing.
Exactly. I got lulled in by Nauru's food by a cute girl who really her mission was to at least get me interested in going to this group, because that is the pretextual mission of every Baha'i, unless proven otherwise, in my opinion, is to push that on you. Like LGBTQ Baha'i experience, he's very inactive in the administration, it seems, and he and I just have nice discussions. Like, he's not trying to convert me. I'm sure Baha'is like him are out there, but they've been silenced by the administration. I wouldn't be so mad at their stances against commenting on politics, for instance, if they didn't prohibit their members from doing so. That is authoritarian. And if you do, then you get administrative sanctions, such as loss of ability to get married, which you have to do the stupid vow for, and I only signed it because it was the moments after my wedding, and my ex-wife's mom had lied about being okay with the altered vow, but seemed very anxious that I should just do that, so I put on a face and compromised my integrity. I take oaths very seriously. I have had an oath to the Constitution and to the people of the United States of America, and in that oath I have been criticizing our domestic enemies in the Trump administration and this fascist regime. So to be compromising myself like that, it bubbled up for a long time. And so I guess I fearlessly criticize people now because, and sometimes get a little purple with my language or florid, because I've been silenced for so long. I've had my autism silenced, I've had my gender identity silenced, and attacked in person. That part was particularly hard to rewatch for the essay that I just uploaded after all these hours of editing. And my mask is a mask of, like, protection for me. The Baha'is mask with a smile. Wahid masks with a kindly old bearded Santa Claus image, I guess, at first, until he has no use for you. And then you get disposed of. He treats people like garbage, including the guy who...
I think I already mentioned some time ago, Wahid and I first made contact when he made a comment on my WordPress blog, Dale Husband's Intellectual Rants, and he invited me to join a website called Iranian.com. And he said that because I was not Persian, or let alone Iranian, I would not be viewed with suspicion by any Baha'is there if I tried to argue against the Baha'i faith there. So I went there, I formed an account on this website, and for a while, Wahid and I were like brothers in arms battling against these Baha'is. And I was really disappointed in how shallow-minded some of these Baha'is seem, because they seem content only to quote from their scriptures and their published propaganda, instead of even trying to think creatively for themselves. And watching all these feeble attempts to argue back against my own essays critical of the Baha'i faith really shocked me, because when I myself was a Baha'i for about 8 years, I was regarded as highly knowledgeable by other Baha'is. But that proved to be a double-edged sword in that in the last year of my being a Baha'i, I started to subject the Baha'i faith to the same sort of critical analysis I subjected to Christianity. And when I did, within a few months, the credibility of the Baha'i faith fell completely apart for me. And so I left it. And then after we had got done with Iranian.com, we both ended up on Reddit together, me and Wahid Took, and I joined r/ex-Baha'i as a regular member. And at the time, the only mod there was a person known as Salman Wilson. He was the only one there, and he wasn't there very often. And so very often, the ex-Baha'i subreddit would be invaded by Baha'i, particularly this particularly obnoxious Baha'i known to us as David Bennett, or DBO for short. He would come in, he would raise a lot of hell for a few weeks or months, and then come back and raise more hell. And he did this repeatedly. And Wahid Took and I and many others had to deal with the brunt of this. Salman Wilson wasn't seeming to do anything about it until he finally appointed 2 more mods to try to keep a better watch over the subreddit. And shortly after that, David Bennett was finally banned. Saul went off the deep end and started making all sorts of claims about how the subreddit was supposedly run behind the scenes by this wicked cabal, which involved the. He had no reason to make these claims. And because he had no support for them, we all figured out that he was a pathological liar. And he finally got banned for his abusive behavior. And after he got banned, he turned on me because I refused to support him anymore. And he started making up all sorts of outright lies about me, taking things that I had written about serious ethical issues that I've been extremely concerned about, including politics, religion, sexuality, and so forth, trying to depict me as something I absolutely was not. And that made me understand that this was a person with absolutely no sense of morals whatsoever. He was a sociopath, an opportunist, a narcissist. And a person like that, in my opinion, should have absolutely no access to the internet, because all he ever does is cause trouble. He does not so much care about criticizing the Baha'i faith as he wants to promote himself and only himself and as much as he can. If you're not willing to be his blind, deaf, and dumb follower, he will seek to destroy you because his ego is too fragile to stand as an equal with anyone else. And that's a very dangerous, like I said, the case of Joseph Stalin is, an example of a leader who uses communism to climb to the top and then seeks to tear down everyone else.
That's
pretty good analysis, man. My experience was I did a podcast with him, but he took it down. I liked him at first. I thought he was a really great source of knowledge on Iranian mysticism and stuff like that. The only reason I ever even found out about the Baha'i and all this Bab stuff was because of him. They weren't even on my radar at all before I had even come into contact. And then I started to kind of get little ideas like there's something going on here with this guy and this religion here. I think it's a fascinating story. For one thing, his whole battling with the Baha'i and at university about their authoritarian role against Baha'i academic students. He was probably on his way to a good academic career back then, but then it all got sabotaged by this big email group controversy that happened back then. In retaliation, he started finding out about the Bab and then, made these interesting claims about being the modern successor of the Bab and overruling the Abalahu. It's a fascinating tale, that's for sure.
Let me put it this way, as I see it, the credibility of the Bab as a religious leader should have ended the moment he was killed in 1850, because his claim was to be the Mahdi, or the coming of the 12th Imam, who was to overthrow the enemies of Islam. The simple fact that he was killed should have ended that. But the problem was the Baha'is that survived had the sunk cost fallacy, in which you sacrifice so much for yourself. And of course, the Bab himself sacrificed his life. Therefore, the cause still had to be upheld no matter what. And I think the early Christians were also like this too. Even to this day, Christians say that Jesus died for us, therefore we must live for him. So likewise, the Baha'is, and later the Baha'is, said that the Bab had died for us, therefore we must live for this cause we still believe in.
We have about 2 minutes left, so I'd like to make my final statement and then we'll wrap. Okay, so this also happened to the Seventh-day Adventists in 1844 when the promised biblical calendar date did not come. Women and children were gathering their cows and putting heavenly robes on them so their children would have milk in heaven. That's hilarious to me. I only learned about this fact from A Thief in the Night, though, because they were trying to discredit the Seventh-day Adventists and promote the Baha'is. I thought that this was just a neutral book on the phenomenon that a girl I was interested in was giving me, but no, it was a piece of propaganda. Wahid Azal's reign of terror ends now. I will not let him hurt anyone else by tricking them into thinking that he's a good guy who just wants to hear them out. And that's what the mission of the Hidden Faith is. to expose authoritarianism in all its forms. So thank you all for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Okay, cheers.
All right, have a good one.
You bet. Bye.